Hello and welcome to Instagram Live by IECL. Today I'm going to be speaking with Andy Johnson, the Director of Applied Organizational Coaching at IECL. There he is now, so let's just add him to this conversation. Andy, take two. Hello.
There we are. It's just connecting.
Okay, great.
Gotcha. There we are. All good.
Excellent. Welcome. It's great to have the opportunity to speak with you again about today. The topic of the conversation is creating a space to focus on the who of leadership. And this is in context of coaching to integrate in organizations. Leaders, individuals, and organizations need support to manage change and deliver to stakeholder expectations. But how do you focus on the who versus the what? How do you find a balance between managing stakeholders, delivering on task, finding the space to reflect, to increase self-efficacy, to allow creativity and rethinking? How do you integrate fundamental skills required to navigate through these challenges on a daily basis? So these are some of the areas that I would love for us to unpack today, because what we're seeing in organizations at the moment is the critical need to have more effective strategies and methods to accelerate and sustain change, to help and support individuals to successfully implement the desired change and to develop the capacity to make future changes which result in mastery and ownership, right? So while the benefits of coaching are clear, ensuring that coaching is embedded into the organizational DNA is far from easy. So how do we make sure you gain the fullest benefits from coaching and building a coaching culture throughout the organization that sticks and drives impact? So what do we mean by all of this? Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Pounéh. And it's we're having fun with being live again and a few technical issues there at the start. To answer that first question in terms of the benefits and how do we make it stick. Coaching is a lot of coaching is around changing the perspective of the counterpart, of the person that you are coaching. And when we think around this concept of the who of leadership in relation to coaching, it's around changing the perspective of organizations in terms of what they expect to get out of coaching. We often, I think ICL is known for many things, but one of its fundamentals is for, well, two of its fundamentals would be for coach training, but also executive coaching. So a lot of organizations, their assumptions of coaching is that they're quite standalone. They may go for a series of sessions or a number of months, but they tend to look at coaching in terms of quite a standalone aspect. And then once coaching is done, it's kind of what happens after that. In terms of how we change that perspective and we link it towards behavioral change and culture. And I went with behavior change because any culture and coaching culture is around changing behaviors. So how they change the behaviors is really around how they start to integrate, and that integration of a coaching approach into the organization. So it's that kind of shift in behaviors from looking at coaching as a bit of a standalone, and how do they shift their behaviors and start to think around how do they implement and integrate coaching into the organization.
And as for who of the leadership, which is the topic of the discussion today, for those who don't know, what do we actually mean by the who of leadership that needs to be focused on apart from the embedding piece?
Yeah. So if we think around, ICL spent 20 years in the industry, and part of the work that we do would be to work with organizations to design really specific, coach training programs that will allow them to bring a coaching approach to the business conversations and to achieve some of their strategic outcomes. On a real base level, that's looking at the what of coaching. So what are the behaviors of coaching? What are the behaviors of coaching within leadership? What's the role they play in allowing you to step towards hitting your objectives, your business objectives, your people objectives, your development objectives? And quite often that's focused on a series of isolated standalone workshops, which are fantastic, and they will do part of the job. It's starting to shift and look at the who of leadership that happens outside of that sort of out of that workshop. So in terms of what do I mean around the who of leadership, it's who are you being as the leader? How is coaching, and how are you starting to integrate coaching into who you are as a leader? So some of your behaviors, what's the long-term shift in how in who you are as a leader and how you behave? Because we tend to look at the what of leadership and some of the skills and putting people through variations of different training modules or skill uplift. But it's sort of like what am I trying to say? It's what happens on the ground.
Yeah.
When you're back in the workplace and how it comes to life, and it's that who are you being as a leader, and that's what I mean by this concept of focusing on the who of leadership.
So by focusing on the who of leadership, who are the main beneficiaries? Who's impacted the most?
How many times can we say who in one interview? So I think there's multiple. So I'll try and make a bit of common sense without sort of confusing the topic. It's going to be the leader themselves, because how they act, how they behave is going to be different. So they'll start to experience themselves differently, in terms of their ability to actually display some of those skills in their leadership conversations. The biggest impact is going to be on the people that they lead. And the clients, the stakeholders, the individuals that they interact with, because how that who of leadership shows up and how it's experienced is bringing through those fundamental coaching skills. So one of the key aspects for me is how do you get leaders just to slow down? And if they can slow down in conversations, in interactions around all facets of their business world, what space does that create for the other? So what space does that create for their team members, for their stakeholders, for their client groups, whoever they're working with? And what's the benefit of that space for a different way of thinking, different way of interacting? Who's doing more of the work if they're creating this coaching space and this coaching behavior, and how does that allow others to grow? In terms of who it benefits, there's the sort of the leader themselves, the person that they are, and the people that they're interacting with. But if we go to a far broader scale, it's going to be the organization and the organizations that they're working with. And if I just finish this question off by going back to one of the previous ones around culture change and around behavior change, that's how it comes into play. So, just starting to subtly change some of those cultures by who you are as a leader, and what's the impact that has on all the people that you interact with in your day-to-day work within that particular role.
And that was actually going to be my next question. How does this approach sort of help leaders embrace their leadership role?
So I think it's a real shift for me, and this is my particular view. So you can take it or leave it. But I think a lot of leadership is focused on the what. So what is the task at hand? What's the subject matter? What are they working on? And a lot of leaders traditionally have got to where they are because they are the expert, and it's a bit of a natural transition when you're in organizations for a longer period of time. So it's really shifting to how they behave as a leader, and their ability to have these conversations and his ability to really bring a coaching approach and shift their behaviors. And that's how it starts to show up and come into play, because you're taking what they've learned through a workshop, through a series of learning interactions, and then starting to really put it into practice
This
in who they are as a leader when they get back into the workplace.
becomes part of their identity.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could share any kind of examples where or how you've seen creating this kind of space, allowing for genuine diversity of thought, perspective, and identity. I wonder if you have any examples or any kind of experiences to share.
Yeah. So it's with some of the organisations that IECL's worked with and that I've had the opportunity to work with, part of the process and part of the program that we're working with them on has got lots of touch points outside of the actual outside of that sort of workshop element. And that might be some group sessions, and that might be individual coaching. And it's through that ongoing transfer of learning, which I'll talk about some of the limits of that in a moment and some of changing the mindsets of organizations. But it might be sort of 6 months after the actual workshop. And it's what you start to notice in some of those group sessions where you've got leaders come back together and they start to share and they start to challenge each other and they start to learn from each other. So they're starting to sort of self-generate. And there's it's fascinating to kind of watch from it's almost, I feel like a bit of a David Attenborough at certain times, because you start to see how they learn from each other and they start to change their own behaviors. And, okay, so if you're doing that and you've experienced it, then it's okay for me to experience that. And here's what I've tried, what I've put into play. So they start to challenge their own thought process and their diversity of actual thinking around how they are and who they show up as a leader in the workplace. But I've also seen where some organizations they kind of hold the reins tightly around these are the stepping stones, and they have a real understanding of what needs to be in place from a internal and external support for any change to actually happen. So they create these new stable behaviors. And they've got people embedded in the business who can assist, and they can have these sort of interactions, as well as IECL coming in to continue to coach these leaders on their coaching and on their leadership and who they are and how they are as leaders. So I've worked with 3 or 4 organizations that have had, I would say, quite a unique approach to how they're changing their leadership behavior and the culture of the organization through focusing on the what in terms of the skill aspect and the upskilling, but also the who in terms of, the how and the who in terms of their actual leadership transition and how they're working with these leaders moving forward.
Nice. So from your experience, what's currently missing in organizations? And, how does IECL and what we offer sort of help fill in that gap?
Yeah, there's a couple of points, and I don't want to be too controversial, so I'll sort of stick between the flags, if you like.
Please be controversial.
That's
what we're all about, challenging status quo.
Yeah. So one thing for me, and this is something that if I have a good relationship with the client, I can be a little bit challenging on. So it's the perception of return on investment. So a lot of people will pay for something if they can see the parameters, or they can touch or feel or understand what they're getting. It's when that financial investment and the return on it is a little bit ambiguous and you can't see it and you can't touch it and it sits in the unknown, that a lot of them are a little bit uncomfortable. So they'll often pay for a block of coaching. So they'll pay for X amount of sessions of coaching because they can see that, they know when it starts, they know when it ends, or they'll pay for some workshops that actually focus on the skills. Where where I see that understanding isn't at the moment is looking at the long-term view of, we've got to have other events. We've got to have, let's have some ongoing coaching. Let's almost have a member of it. What I would love is to have an IECL member of our team, member of our education faculty, or one of our associates that has a long-term partnership with these organizations. And there's longer term touch points to assist leaders in how they change and how they adapt and how they grow, and what's the who of their leadership, because we all change at different speeds based on many things that I won't go into now because that's a whole different conversation. But that's what I think is missing. It's that having the sort of really getting on board and going, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this for the next 6 to 12 months. So that in 12 months' time, we are well on our way with changing behaviors, really integrating a coaching approach to our leadership, to our organization, and really focusing on the who of our leaders' capability.
Yeah, so also changing from what I'm also hearing is, changing your view from that short-term view to more that long-term embedding and, making sure it permeates into the culture at every level and so on.
Yeah, and I mean, there's lots of different themes and ideas that I'm currently working on, starting to challenge some of our well-established longer-term clients in terms of what's missing from what we're doing, and what can we do with you moving forward. Whether it's having someone embedded within your management team that they can observe leaders and how they're bringing a coaching approach. So there's quite a unique opportunity here for IECL to step into. It's almost like we need someone to step with us first. And then we can start to reflect on the benefits of that particular approach.
So lastly, I wondered if you could challenge leaders who have upskilled to coaching to do one thing, what would that be?
Just one thing.
Oh, it can be more than one, but let's start.
I think there's the concept of being more coach-like.
Explain.
I think a lot of leaders that upskill in coaching as part of their leadership, my experience is that they'll have scheduled coaching sessions, and in those coaching sessions, they move from the role of the leader into the role of the coach, or leader as coach. But outside of that, in their other conversations around business, strategy, so on and so forth, the general conversations, I don't want to call them bad habits, but sort of non-coaching habits still shine through in terms of how they interact with others. And so my advice or challenge or invitation is to think around, let's look at coaching and the skills of, but how do you take it out and integrate it into just who you are as a leader, and who you are in terms of when you sit with another person or the group of people, how do you hold the silence? How do you create space for other people to create new ideas, to step into that silence, to generate new questions, to generate different questions, and just to start to challenge that diversity of thought. And what does that do for the environment when you invite other people to step up, and you start to build a different level of trust, and there's a different level of tension, and they start to witness you as a different leader because those coaching behaviors are strongly integrated into who you are, but also how you are. I just think for some leaders, and I'm talking generally here, when it comes down to some of the tough business decisions, they can quite easily slip back. And there's always opportunities where you can ask one more question, or you can hold silence, or you can challenge someone else with a stronger coaching approach, rather than a little bit more of a directive, traditional sometimes in some organizations, leadership or business approach. So we I won't go on too much longer, Pounéh, but we communicate every day whether it's virtually, physically. So it's looking for the opportunities of how you can bring more of a coaching approach to all of those interactions. And what's the subtle shift? And I think if leaders adopted that, there'd be a significant benefit for them in how they experience themselves, and how they feel, and maybe how they hold on to tension, and how they feel at the end of the day and the beginning of the day. So there's some possibly interesting research here that I'm now putting out there. But that would be my challenge.
One subtle shift at a time.
Look,
Love it.
I think what I would say is if I think around my generation and the generation when I came into the workplace, there was a bit of a shift starting to happen in terms of change of leadership. And what I've seen through my generation, other generations, that leadership is changing because those entering the workplace expect something different, and they're bringing something different. So I think it's on the way. It's how, as coaches, can we assist with that, so that it starts to happen across all facets of leadership, behavior, organizational culture, and we're able to really assist them apply coaching and coaching principles to every aspect of how they communicate internally and externally.
I like that. Obviously, we're living through times where we're surrounded by so much change and so many conflicting demands on us personally and professionally. So it makes sense to adopt this kind of, thinking, just to be able to sustain, the demands and the change that's required of us on a constantly, on a daily basis. Andy Johnson, thank you very much once again for your time. You have shared some fantastic insights. If there's any last minute words, please share with our audiences. I like the challenge. Happily accepted. I hope more of our leaders will take on the challenge as well. One subtle shift at a time.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. Until
Pleasure.
our
Thank
next
you.
session.
Look forward to it.
Brilliant. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thanks, Pounéh. See ya.
Bye.